She had always been the quiet, humble woman who put everyone else first. But when Olivia Mitchell was dragged out of business class on a flight, humiliated in front of everyone, she wondered if she'd ever truly belong in a world she had only dreamed of. But just as the whispers grew louder, her CEO husband walked on board, and in that moment, everything changed. What happened next silenced the room, and Olivia learned that no one could take away her dignity, not even in the face of judgment. Olivia Mitchell had spent years putting others first. As a single mother, balancing a full-time job with raising 2 children, every decision she made revolved around their well-being. The sacrifices she'd made over the years had become second nature. But today, this moment was about her. This was her chance to step into a world she had only ever dreamed of, a world where she wasn't just a mother, a worker, or a caretaker. Today, she was going to be Olivia, a woman who deserved something special, just for herself. It all started with a business class ticket. The moment Olivia had received the email confirmation from the airline, her heart had skipped a beat. It wasn't just the luxury of the seat, or the promise of extra legroom. It was the validation of her hard work. She hadn't had a day off in months, but she'd managed to save up enough money, tight as it was, to buy this flight, her reward for the tireless effort she had poured into her job and family. At 45, Olivia had learned to accept simplicity. She dressed modestly, preferring comfortable yet unassuming clothes. Today, she wore a simple black dress, paired with a cardigan that she had worn to countless office meetings. She didn't mind that it wasn't a designer label, didn't care that her shoes were practical over stylish. The truth was, she'd grown used to standing in the background, never the center of attention. But this was her moment to bask in something she could call her own. She was about to fly business class. She looked at her business class ticket in her hands once again. Olivia Mitchell, business class, seat 2A. Those words printed boldly on the elegant cardstock felt like a dream come true. She was going to sit in the front of the plane, the same place she had seen others enjoy during countless flights. Longing for the comfort, the space, the treatment. She had worked for this, saved for it, and today, she was going to take her place among those who rarely had to second-guess whether they belonged in a place like this. The journey to the gate felt like walking on clouds. Olivia walked through the terminal, passing travelers who seemed to glide effortlessly past her. She kept her head high, feeling the small stirrings of excitement bubble inside her. Despite the nervous flutter in her chest, there was a small part of her that wondered if others would notice. She wasn't used to this. Would they look at her and see someone who didn't belong in business class? Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor as she approached the business class gate. She glanced around. The passengers waiting to board were dressed in expensive suits, their faces exuding confidence, while Olivia felt self-conscious in her plain dress. Would they look at her and think, what is she doing here? The gate agent gave Olivia a strained smile as she scanned the boarding pass. Olivia felt a fleeting discomfort in the way the agent's eyes lingered a bit too long on her dress, on her shoes, on her simple appearance. But the smile was polite, and Olivia told herself it didn't matter. She had earned this moment, and she was going to enjoy it. Enjoy your flight, ma'am, the agent said, with the same stiff smile as Olivia stepped toward the jet bridge. The words felt hollow, but she smiled back anyway. She didn't need to convince the agent of her worth. This was her time. Walking down the jet bridge, Olivia's steps felt oddly slow. There were too many thoughts swirling in her head. What if she didn't belong here? What if the people around her could tell she didn't fit in? As she boarded the plane, she kept her head down, trying not to meet anyone's eyes. She didn't want to see the judgment in their gazes. She just wanted to find her seat and settle in. The plush seats in business class looked nothing like the cramped ones in economy. There were blankets neatly folded beside the armrests, and a glass of water already waiting. Olivia's heart beat a little faster. She was here, in this elegant, calm space. It was all so new to her, so unfamiliar. This wasn't just about luxury. It was about stepping into a world that seemed out of reach. But now, here it was. Within her grasp. She slid into seat 2A and adjusted her cardigan. She was proud of herself, but the pride was bittersweet. Was she allowed to feel this way? Was she allowed to take up this space? Her reflection in the window made her pause for a moment. A woman in her mid-40s, no makeup, no designer labels, just a simple woman who had worked hard to get where she was. Was that enough? Before she could settle into the quiet calm of the seat, she was interrupted. A flight attendant appeared, her smile stiff. Olivia's stomach twisted. She wasn't sure what she had expected. But this didn't feel right. "Good afternoon, ma'am. May I see your boarding pass?" The flight attendant's tone wasn't welcoming. It was clinical, almost like a command. Olivia's heart skipped. "Of course," she replied, fumbling in her purse for the ticket she had already shown at the gate. She handed it over, trying not to let the tension show on her face. The attendant's smile didn't soften as she glanced at the boarding pass, her gaze flickering briefly to Olivia's attire. "Seat 2A, the attendant said, her voice flat. "Yes, that's here. Thank you." She handed the boarding pass back to Olivia like it was something she didn't want to touch. The woman turned and walked away without a word, but the exchange had left Olivia feeling unsettled. She'd just been asked for her ticket again. Was this some kind of mistake? Olivia slipped her earbuds into her ears, trying to shake off the discomfort. She was in business class. For goodness sake, she was allowed to be here. But as she looked around, the whispers began. Across the aisle, a woman in a cream blazer leaned toward her husband, speaking low enough for Olivia to catch a few words. "Business class doesn't look like it used to." The words stung. It wasn't the first time someone had judged her, and Olivia knew it wouldn't be the last. But it didn't make it easier to hear. She turned her gaze toward the window, pretending not to notice the judgment in the air. She had earned this. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone, but the sting of the words and the glance she'd caught in the attendant's eyes wouldn't go away. A few moments later, the flight attendant returned, this time with a male colleague in tow. Both had their eyes on Olivia, and the conversation began in hushed tones. "Ma'am, can you step into the aisle for a moment?" the male attendant asked, his voice polite but firm. Confusion bubbled up in Olivia's chest. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart was beginning to race. "We just need to confirm something with you," the attendant said, glancing at the ticket again. Olivia felt the eyes of every other passenger on her as she stood and stepped into the aisle. The tension in the air was palpable. She felt exposed, like a spotlight was shining on her, her every move being scrutinized, as she followed the attendants down the aisle. Every step felt heavier, every whisper louder. The embarrassment was building. Was it possible that they didn't think she belonged here? That they thought she was lying about her ticket? Darren Mitchell was no stranger to the spotlight. As the CEO of one of the world's leading tech companies, he was used to being the center of attention. Power, money, influence, he had it all. But none of that mattered when it came to Olivia. She wasn't just his wife. She was the woman who had stood by him through everything. While his world was filled with high-end meetings and boardrooms, Olivia's world was far different, modest and grounded. When they first met years ago, Olivia was a quiet, unassuming assistant. Darren had seen something in her that others didn't. The warmth in her eyes, the way she carried herself with grace despite the challenges life threw at her, the kindness that was so rare in a world filled with ambition. From the moment they met, he knew she was different. She wasn't chasing power or fame. She was chasing something deeper, something that made her stand out even in a crowded room. Olivia had always put others first, and Darren admired her for it. But now, he wanted to remind her that she was worthy of being taken care of. She had worked hard for everything, and now it was his turn to treat her. That's why he'd arranged everything. The business class ticket, the special getaway, and everything in between. He wanted to show her that she was deserving of luxury, of indulgence, of a world she rarely stepped into. Darren arrived at the airport.com and collected the same unshakable presence he carried into every room. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, his leather briefcase in hand. He walked through the terminal with ease, his every step measured, his eyes scanning the area as he made his way toward the gate. He knew Olivia was already on the plane, settled into her business class seat, ready to enjoy the flight. But when he reached the gate, something wasn't right. His gaze immediately swept over the cabin, and it didn't take long to spot the absence of his wife. In seat 2, the plush seat sat empty. The folded blanket and untouched glass of water the only remnants of her brief presence. He checked his phone, reading the text Olivia had sent. "Yeah, just waiting for takeoff." Darren frowned. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong. Walking toward the gate agent, he nodded a polite greeting. "Good afternoon, Miss Anderson," he said. The agent smiled, but her posture stiffened when she saw him approach. She recognized him instantly. "Mr. Mitchell, good afternoon," she said, but there was something in her eyes, unease, maybe even guilt. Darren's eyes narrowed as he scanned the cabin again. "Where's my wife?" "Olivia Mitchell, seat 2A. His tone remained calm, but there was an undercurrent of concern that the agent couldn't ignore. "Oh yes, Mr. Mitchell," the gate agent began, glancing nervously at the flight attendants nearby. There was an issue with her seat assignment. She was moved to economy. Darren's brow furrowed. Moved without any explanation. His pulse quickened. Moved to economy. He repeated, his voice steady, but growing sharper. For what reason? The gate agent hesitated. It appears her ticket was flagged for some sort of verification. We thought there was a mistake with the seat. We're very sorry for the inconvenience, sir. Darren's jaw tightened. A mistake. His wife was being humiliated for a mistake. I bought that ticket myself. Through your app. I'm platinum with your airline. There's no mistake. The gate agent blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct response. We apologize, sir. It was a precaution. Precaution for what? Darren's voice didn't rise, but it was clear that he was no longer playing by the rules. My wife should not have been removed from her seat. I want her back in tour, right now. Without a word, the agent hurried toward the back of the plane, her steps quick, like she was trying to escape the storm she had unintentionally created. Darren turned toward the business class cabin, feeling the shift in energy. The passengers were watching, no longer pretending not to listen. He was used to people staring, used to his status as a CEO, but this felt different. This wasn't about business deals or meetings. This was personal. This was about his wife, his Olivia, being treated as if she didn't belong. Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. Darren's patience didn't waver, but inside, he was seething. He had worked hard for everything he had, but his true pride wasn't in his business empire, it was in the woman standing by his side, and no one, not anyone, was going to make her feel less than she was. The flight attendant returned first, her steps hesitant, her face flushed. She didn't even need to speak. Her nervous energy said it all. Behind her, Olivia walked into view. She was calm, her head held high, but Darren could see the strain in her posture. He could see the weight of the judgment she had endured just moments before. She wasn't just walking. She was carrying the sting of humiliation on her shoulders. Without a word, Darren reached out and placed his hand on Olivia's shoulder. The touch was firm, protective, and it spoke volumes. Olivia looked up at him, and for a split second, the weight of everything seemed to melt away. The flight attendants stepped back, not daring to speak, but Darren's gaze never left them. They knew who he was. They knew they had made a grave mistake, and it was time for them to face the consequences. Olivia, Darren said softly, turning to his wife, let's get you back to your seat. You've earned this. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath as Olivia followed Darren toward her seat. The whispers that had once echoed through the aisles had quieted, replaced by an awkward silence. It wasn't just the passengers who had been watching her. Every move, now, every pair of eyes was fixed on Darren, their gaze a mixture of curiosity, guilt, and uncertainty. Olivia felt their stares, but she also felt something else, the unwavering strength of Darren's presence beside her. With each step they took, she could feel the tension in the air begin to dissipate. But the sting of what had just happened was still raw. As they reached the front of the plane, Olivia's seat 2A came into view once more. Darren motioned for her to sit, and she did, slipping into the plush seat she had been removed from just moments earlier. She sank into it, grateful to be back, but the weight of the situation still hung over her. She wasn't sure how long it would take for the bruises to heal, how long it would take to shake the feeling of being humiliated in front of a plane full of strangers. Darren stood beside her, his eyes never leaving the flight attendants who had been responsible for her removal. The silence between them stretched on, but it was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Darren wasn't about to let this slide. He wasn't about to let anyone believe that Olivia, his wife, could be treated like she didn't belong. The flight attendants stood frozen, their faces pale. They had made a mistake, and they knew it. The tension in the air was palpable. The male attendant, who had been the one to escort Olivia to the back of the plane, cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Mr. Mitchell, we sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding, he began, his voice shaky but polite. He glanced over at his female colleague, who was standing nearby, clearly uncomfortable. This was entirely a mistake. We weren't aware of the situation, and we acted hastily. Darren's eyes narrowed. He didn't want an apology. He wanted accountability. A mistake. His voice was low, calm, but there was a fire in it that made the attendants flinch. You think my wife deserves to be humiliated like that because of a mistake? The attendant faltered, unable to find the right words. Darren's gaze sharpened as he continued, his tone unwavering. You assumed my wife didn't belong here. That's not just a mistake, that's a judgment. And you need to understand that what you did was wrong. The female flight attendant, who had been silent until now, shifted uncomfortably on her feet. "We never meant to," she began, but Darren cut her off with a single, pointed look. "No, you didn't mean to," he said, his voice steady, but full of authority. "But intentions don't matter when someone is made to feel less than they are. Olivia has worked hard for everything she has. She doesn't deserve to be treated like this." He turned his gaze to Olivia, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "And neither do you." Olivia looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. His words, strong and unwavering, were everything she needed to hear in this moment. She had always known Darren was a man of integrity, but now, she was seeing it in full force, his ability to stand up for her, even when the world seemed to want to tear her down. The flight attendants stood silently, their eyes lowered. They knew they had crossed a line, and Darren wasn't about to let them off the hook so easily. "Apologies aren't enough," Darren continued, his voice cutting through the air. "I expect you to file an incident report and make sure this never happens again. Not to my wife, not to anyone." The attendants nodded quickly, their faces flushed with embarrassment. "Of course, Mr. Mitchell," the male attendant said. "We'll take care of it immediately." Darren's gaze remained steady. "Good. Now, I suggest you give us the space to enjoy the rest of our flight in peace." With that, the attendants quickly backed away, their heads down, retreating to the front of the plane without a word. The cabin felt heavy with the weight of what had just transpired, but Darren's presence had filled the space with an unspoken understanding. He wasn't just a CEO who knew how to handle business. He was a man who stood by the people he loved, no matter the cost. Olivia, still in seat 2A, took a deep breath. Her body had stiffened with the tension of the confrontation. But now that the attendants were gone, a small sense of relief began to wash over her. Darren's words had been the shield she needed, his unwavering support in the face of public judgment had given her the strength to stand tall, even when she felt small. As Darren sat down next to her, he gave her a reassuring smile, his hand resting gently on hers. "You good?" he asked, his voice soft but strong, like the anchor that kept her grounded. Olivia nodded, the tightness in her chest loosening. "Yeah," she replied, her voice steady now. "I'm okay. I'm just... I'm still processing it all." "No, baby," Darren said, his voice warm and comforting. "But just remember, this is about you, not what they think, not what anyone else assumes. You earned your place here, and don't you forget it." Olivia looked up at him, the corners of her lips lifting into a small smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you for standing up for me." Darren squeezed her hand. "I'll always stand by you, and I'll always make sure you know your worth. No one can take that from you." The plane began to taxi down the runway, and as it lifted into the sky, Olivia leaned back in her seat, the weight of the world lifting from her shoulders. The whispers of the other passengers didn't matter anymore. She had Darren by her side, and that was all that mattered. In this moment, she wasn't just a woman who had been humiliated. She was Olivia Mitchell, a woman who was loved, supported, and deserving of every success life had to offer. As the plane continued its ascent into the clouds, the atmosphere inside the cabin shifted. The earlier tension had dissipated, replaced by a subtle, almost electric quiet. The passengers who had once whispered and judged now sat in stillness, their eyes averted, their discomfort palpable. Olivia could feel the weight of their gazes without needing to look. They were no longer interested in her presence. The whispers had stopped. The judging eyes had moved on. But the impact of the moment would stay with them for a long time. And yet, in the middle of all this discomfort, Olivia sat taller than she ever had before. She wasn't the same woman who had walked onto this plane an hour ago. No, that woman had been unsure, hesitant, and vulnerable, trying to justify her place among people who clearly thought she didn't belong. But now, she was different. With Darren beside her, showing unwavering support and standing up for her when she had needed it most. Olivia felt an inner strength that she had long forgotten she had. As the flight attendants moved about the cabin, Olivia noticed the way their demeanor had shifted. Their earlier hesitation had turned into something more subdued, almost apologetic. They kept their distance from her and Darren, their interactions polite but reserved. Olivia wasn't interested in their attempts at compensation or politeness. She didn't need their validation. She had Darren's. "Do you want something to eat?" Darren asked softly, breaking her thoughts. He reached for the menu that had been placed on the table in front of her. Olivia glanced at the menu but shook her head. "I'm not hungry," she replied. She wasn't sure if it was the discomfort of the situation or the wave of emotions still coursing through her that made food unappealing. She just wanted peace. But more than that, she wanted to feel seen for who she was, not for what others assumed about her. "You sure?" Darren pressed, concern flickering in his eyes. "I'm sure," Olivia said, offering him a small smile. She felt his warmth, his love, his unspoken promise to always be there. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like everything would be okay. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone. She already knew her worth, and Darren knew it too. As they settled into a comfortable silence, Olivia's thoughts began to drift back to the way she had been treated earlier. The sting of the flight attendant's actions still lingered, but she wasn't going to let it define her. Darren had made sure of that. He had shown her that her worth wasn't tied to anyone's assumptions or judgments. It was tied to who she was, the strong, independent woman who had worked her entire life to create a better future for herself and her children. It was tied to the love and respect Darren had for her, and the way he had protected her dignity. In front of a whole cabin of strangers, Olivia reached over and took Darren's hand in hers, squeezing it gently. He turned to her, his expression softening. "You've always been enough, Olivia," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years of understanding between them. "You've always been more than enough." She smiled, her heart swelling with affection. "I know," she whispered, "and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for you." As the plane sailed through the sky, the world below becoming a blur, Olivia's mind calmed. She wasn't just a simple woman from a modest background. She was a woman of strength, resilience, and grace. And she was loved by a man who saw her for exactly who she was, who stood by her. Even when the world tried to knock her down, there was power in knowing your worth, in standing tall, no matter what anyone thought of you. Olivia had spent so much of her life allowing others' opinions to shape how she saw herself. But now, she understood that she couldn't allow the world to define her. She had worked too hard for everything she had, and she was entitled to enjoy the rewards, just like anyone else. The sound of the engines hummed in the background, a soothing noise that seemed to echo the peace she was finally beginning to feel. She wasn't just sitting in business class now. She was sitting beside a man who respected her, loved her, and would always be there to make sure she knew her value. In that moment, Olivia realized that she had everything she needed to succeed in life, and it wasn't about where she sat on a plane or what others thought of her. It was about the strength within her, the love she had for herself, and the people who truly saw her for who she was. When the seatbelt sign lit up, signaling that the plane was preparing to descend, Olivia didn't feel the usual anxiety she had about landing. There was no fear, no dread about what awaited her on the ground. She had found her peace, and no one could take that away from her. Darren glanced at her, his eyes warm. And for the first time since the incident, Olivia felt completely at ease. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Olivia nodded, her smile reaching her eyes. "Yeah," she said, "I'm ready." As the plane began its descent, she knew that no matter what happened next, she would never again let anyone take her dignity. She would always stand tall, knowing her worth, and never shrinking in the face of others' judgment. She had already claimed her seat, figuratively and literally.